Well, we've been talking once again this morning about Prince Andrew and how China tries to exert influence on the United Kingdom. But of course, it's not the only big authoritarian regime that tries to do so on democracies around the world. In only the last few weeks, Russia's efforts to subvert European democracy has been laid bare, from Moldova to Romania to Georgia. So just how much of a risk does the network of authoritarians pose to us? I'm joined now by the author of Autocracy, Inc., the journalist Anne Applebaum. Good morning, Anne.
Good morning.
Now, in recent years, we've been talking a lot about cyber attacks, surveillance and all of that. But now we're reading about Chinese spying networks. We're reading about Russian honey traps. A government minister told me this morning there are sleeper cells going on. Are we heading back to the good old Cold War days of straightforward skullduggery, Moscow rules and so forth?
I don't think it's exactly like the Cold War, because what we're facing isn't a single adversary with a single ideology. What we're seeing is that there's a network of autocratic states: nationalist Russia, communist China, theocratic Iran, Venezuela, Belarus, until a few days ago, Syria. And these are countries who have very different ideologies, but they've begun to work together opportunistically, and they've begun to do so because they all have a common enemy, and that enemy is us. So the enemy is the liberal democratic world, the language that we use, the language of rights, of the rule of law. That's, of course, the language of their own internal opposition, and it's the language that threatens regimes or individuals who rule without checks and balances, without independent courts, without any independent media. And they increasingly see that undermining us, stealing our ideas, stealing our data, that this is part of what they need to stay in charge. And I think that's the world that we're facing now.
The states that you mentioned are investing hugely from hard power, Russia, war, right across to soft power, China's Belt and Road Initiative, trades and Silk Road strategy, all that, making friends all over the world. Are they winning?
I mean, winning is a hard word to use. I mean, these are, of course, some of them are very fragile states. Again, we just saw a Syrian regime that had been in power for 50 years, described itself as everlasting. We saw that it fell in a couple of days because it was unable to pay people, it was unable to increase its support, and because the network of dictatorships, Russia and Iran, who were supporting it, suddenly became too weak to do so. So I'm not sure that they're exactly winning, but they are changing their tactics all of the time, and they're looking to shape and influence our internal politics in a way that I think we aren't used to and we're not really prepared for. And so when you see them doing things that surprise you, for example, promoting a Romanian presidential candidate on TikTok, which is, of course, a Chinese-run app, or when you see them intervening in French or British or German elections. We're still surprised by that, but I think we probably shouldn't be.
You lay a lot of this out in your book, Autocracy, Inc., which we don't do plugs on this show, but I recommend intelligent readers get it, because it's revealing. You wrote it before, of course, Syria happened. To what extent is the fall of Bashar Assad a blow to that alliance?
Oh, it's a blow. It's a blow because, as I said, one of the ways in which this network operates is that the stronger states work together to prop up the weaker ones. I mean, on the other side of the world, Venezuela is a state that would have fallen a long time ago, a regime that's deeply unpopular, has impoverished its people, has created the biggest refugee crisis in the Western Hemisphere, maybe in the world. Yet it stays in power because of Russian arms, because of Chinese investment, because of Cuban assistance with security police, and because of Iranian help avoiding sanctions. And so you see how they have an interest in propping one another up. They do feel that the fall of any dictator reflects badly on all of them, and the fall of Assad will, of course, have been widely noticed in Moscow and will have been experienced as a blow. Of course, what it might also mean is that Putin doubles down on his war in Ukraine. Now he has all of his, all of his cards really on that one on that one war. I mean, if the fate of his regime and his argument about his superiority and his ability to rebuild the Russian Empire, I mean, it all depends now on his being able to destroy Ukraine.
I want to come to Putin in a moment, but it's a very interesting thing that you tackle, which is not just their individual tactical operation, but in a sense, the attraction of these authoritarian regimes, because they are actually persuading people in some parts of the world. You mentioned, for example, Venezuela, and it's very striking. There's a country with the biggest oil reserves in the world by a long way, 600 billion barrels or thereabout, and its people are starving. If you live in Iran and you happen to be a woman, frankly, you don't get to do anything very much. What is it that is attractive about these regimes that makes them a threat, if you like, to what you call the liberal democratic order?
So it depends which regimes, there's a lot of talk in the air nowadays about people in the Western world, in the democratic world, admiring or wanting some aspect of autocracy or dictatorship because it seems more efficient. They could get things done more quickly. The autocratic world has also been very good at building a narrative about autocracy being stable and safe and democracy being weak and divided. And that's found a lot of support and, people in the US, the UK, and Europe also hearing that and listening to it and thinking maybe there's something to it. But you make a good point, which is that when you look around the autocratic world, what you see in practice is that autocratic regimes impoverish people. They take away their rights. They create profoundly unequal societies. They create refugees. Almost all the ones we've been talking about now have created huge outflows of people looking for a better life somewhere else. Nevertheless, the magic of the idea that there's some better way that we could, with a stronger leader or a more decisive regime, we could change things faster, it continues to have an appeal. And I think, it's always had an appeal. And everybody who ever designed a democratic state or wrote a constitution or thought about these ideas when they first emerged in the 17th and 18th centuries knew that it had an appeal. It's just very important that we, inside democracies, continue to remind ourselves what the result is, what happens when you get rid of the rule of law, when you get rid of rights.
There is a point of view that says that we on our side, if you can call it that, the Liberal Democratic side, have just acquired, if you like, our own autocratic or would-be autocratic leader. What impact do you think Mr. Trump is going to have on this balance?
Certainly, this is not my interpretation. This is just what I hear listening to him. And Trump uses autocratic language. He uses the kind of language Hugo Chavez used before he became the leader of Venezuela, or the kind of language you can hear from other elected leaders who then push their countries in more autocratic directions. The United States is a big country. There's going to be a lot of pushback. It's hard for me to predict now in what exact direction that will go. The one thing I will say is that it's pretty clear that Donald Trump doesn't see himself as the leader of a big, broad Democratic camp who together are going to push back against the autocracies. There might have been a role for that with a different American president. He's not going to want to do that. And therefore, if the democracies do want to defend themselves and they do want to defend their way of life and they do want to push back against kleptocracy, which we haven't talked about yet, which is an important part of this story too, against the spying and the dirty tricks that you're seeing so much of in London, and of course against the war in Ukraine. If we want to do that, we may have to create other kinds of alliances inside Europe, between Europe and Asia. The democratic world is going to have to think really creatively in order to push back.
Anne Applebaum, I wish we had more time. Fascinating topic. Much in your book, Autocracy, Inc. Thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you.